All right, I'm going to hit record. We should be good to go. Again, this is just kind of a data annotation workshop. We're going to talk about building your own data sets for different computer vision applications. Hit record. I put this there as a reminder for myself because I often forget, but we are recording. Setup, again, I shared the links in the chat. I'll share this again though. Oh, I did the same mistake that I was saying other people not to do. I was sharing just to panelists, so it was just me in this case. Let me share all the other links to everyone as well. So again, if you want to send questions to everyone and kind of have a conversation, make sure you hit that drop-down box because I just did the same mistake that I called out as well. So just for this workshop, if you want to follow along, you really just need a modern web browser like Chrome, and then you can sign up for Sense Data Annotation at the link I shared in the chat. Once you sign up there, so I'll actually just open up real quick. So you go to the link like this, you just fill out this form with your name, email, password, and organization name. And then you'll get a confirmation email. And I believe you have to go to that email, hit confirm, and then you'll be able to get into your account. All right, so what this workshop is, it's an introduction to data annotation and using kind of AI-powered labeling tools to speed up your process for computer vision labeling. And we're going to cover how to do this for object detection, so like bounding boxes, if you've seen this before, instant segmentation with polygons, feature points, that's what you'd use for like facial applications or pose estimation. We'll actually see a quick little demo of each of these right before we go into labeling. And then classification, where we're determining a class that's in a photo, like a classic example, it's a dog or cat. So again, feel free to ask questions as we go, and I'll be hanging out afterwards. So if you do want to save any questions for at the end, or we want to go off topic into not data annotation, feel free to stick around and I'll be hanging out. A little bit about me. My name is Sage Elliott. I'm a machine learning developer evangelist at Sixskill. We do really cool stuff in machine learning, computer vision, IoT, and kind of tying all those things together. And then we're also making tools to make it a lot easier for everyone else to do that in their organization. For about the past decade, I've worked either as a software or a hardware engineer, mainly with startups and small agencies around in Seattle, Washington, and then Central Florida. I really like making things with technology. You can stay connected with me at sageelliott.com. I have links to all my stuff there. I'm at Sage Codes on Twitter, or you can just find me on LinkedIn at Sage Elliott with 2 L's and 2 T's. About you, if you want to, again, I know people tend to be a little quiet in this one, but if you want to let me know in the chat where you're watching this from or why you're interested in data annotation, that's always really cool to hear. But also staying connected with others is something I miss doing. It's hard when things aren't in person. Do you have a Slack channel there that if you, I just shared the link in the chat. If you want to join, go to sixskill.tech/Slack, sign up there. And there's an introduction channel too. So if you just want to introduce yourself there and hopefully meet other people, that could be a cool place to do so. Someone said they're from Australia. Awesome. That's really cool. What time is it over in Australia? Someone said from California, Bay Area. Someone says 9 a.m. in Australia. Awesome. Well, thank you for being on here at 9 a.m. And I'll share this link again for sign up for anyone who just joined in and you missed the sign up link. We're going to be using that annotation tool. Why you need labels for computer vision. So computer vision isn't always tied to deep learning, but most of the modern day use cases you hear about are. You essentially need to feed a deep learning neural network or some type of machine learning labels in order for it to learn. So you could imagine having a function, either a programming function or a mathematical function. You feed it training data, it learns from all that training data. We'll look at it several times, or usually more than several times. And then you pass it a new piece of data and you get some sort of prediction return from it. And so we need to label data to create usually these computer vision deep learning models. In order to create those, you need to feed it the right type of labeled data. So for object detection, which is using bounding boxes or getting these bounding boxes predicted back, where not only does it have classification of what's in the image, it's actually predicting where they are specifically. So you can see it's drawing a rectangle around where a goose is in this model. And a preview of the label for object detection, right? We're just labeling bounding boxes like this. The model is going to look within these areas and learn what we're looking for. Instance segmentation. So instead of just doing bounding boxes, it's actually doing very specific pixels of the image or video frame where that object is. So this can also increase accuracy sometimes, even if you're just trying to do object detection. And then also it's much more precise. So if you actually need some sort of to calculate some sort of interactivity between pixels with each other, you can do that with instance segmentation. So here is an example of bottles being filled, and we're actually tracking where the bottle is and the specific pixels. You can see it's colored. It doesn't just have the box like the object detection. And then we're also seeing this like water fill level go up. So you could actually do a calculation here being like how many pixels, overlay with each other and calculate the fill level just based on that, which is pretty cool. One example too, I like to bring up, right? If you were doing some sort of virtual keyboard and you want to know precisely what key a finger is pressing, you'd need to do something like instance segmentation, or we'll look at pose estimation in a second, but actually seeing precisely where something is. And if it was touching a virtual keyboard in VR, you'd want to know when that's happening versus just a whole hand or something like that with a larger rectangle. So instance segmentation is really good for kind of this type of precision, and then also accuracy as well. And to label for that, you label with polygons. So you kind of have to trace around where the object is. And we'll actually see a lot of tools in the Sense Data Annotation product that actually helps speed that up a lot, specifically because drawing around stuff, especially if it's a complex shape, is really time consuming and it can be really annoying. So feature point clustering. This is for, like I said, facial applications a lot, or pose estimation. So here's a little example video of measuring poses of people doing yoga. Sorry, the video kind of froze there. Let me start over here. So you're gonna see it's tracking like where their hands are, where their elbows are, kind of where joints are in relation to other joints. And then based on that, you can understand kind of what poses people are in. Or if you're doing faces, you can see like eyebrows in relation to face and the different shapes, and do things like mood estimation and stuff like that. And to label for that, you need to have kind of feature points. So you just kind of draw these dots and they kind of tie together. But you need to do them in a specific order. So we'll see this. We'll go label an example with feature points in a minute. Classification. Classification is often trained on a whole image, or you can do a portion of an image, like a static portion where you always want to crop to a certain point and always look at what's in that specific point or something. And then so like here's an example of a prediction return for this image of a dog. I trained this on dog breeds and a predicted Labrador Retriever, which I think is correct for this. And then for labeling them, you just assign a general class to it. Sometimes you can have multiple classes assigned, like this is a painting. It's also a painting of Van Gogh. So you're usually assigning whole labels to entire images. So instead of like drawing specifically where something is, you're saying associate this whole class with this image. Common export formats. So we can go a little bit more into this later if people want to, but just pointing out some of the common ones that people work with a lot. Cocoa, maybe one of the most popular ones right now. I know I tend to work a lot with it outside of our platform. Pascal VOC, CreateML, that's Apple's version, and then you have Yellow, and then we have a it's called Sense JSON in the product, but it's really just a generic JSON string that you can then create your own data loaders and use it however you need to. I'm just mentioning real quick the full computer vision lifecycle. So typically you have some sort of device management. You're managing edge computing resources or sensors. You have data collection. You're managing data from those sensors, creating data sets, or you're scraping the web, collecting data. Then you're going to label that data. In this case, it's all images for computer vision. And then you have machine learning. So we do model training and selection, like you're picking a model, the best one for your fit, and then training that model on the data that you labeled. And then typically you want to deploy that, running the model on either edge or cloud device. And then you often want to repeat this for a continuous machine learning lifecycle to make sure that your model is always pretty accurate and up to date. This isn't really about that whole thing, but we have a platform kind of managing all those steps. And if you are interested in a demo for that or anything, please let me know at sla@sixskill.com, or you can go to this sixskill.com/contact if you want more information about kind of doing all those steps in a platform. All right, if not though, we'll just get to the data annotation portion. Does anyone have any questions so far? I know we didn't really cover much, but I just want to leave it open if anyone has any questions. And again, here's the sign up link. So if you want to follow along, I suggest signing up. You don't need to the second. You can just watch me and I'll just kind of show you how to do everything, because I'll share this. These are the images I'm going to use as the example as well. So it's kind of the data set for this example. But really, you'll probably just want to see kind of like how we're going to label those things and how you can apply that to your use cases. Does anyone have any use cases they want to share or anything? Someone mentioned construction sites. Yeah, it's a cool field I keep hearing more about, where, or I mean, like not even just hearing about it, like seeing so many people work on stuff like measuring PPE is a big one, like measuring to make sure people are predicting like people have the hard hats or they don't, or the safety vests, all the different things around safety within construction sites is pretty cool. I've also seen people doing kind of out of the scope of that, but like doing cool stuff with self-driving tractors in construction spaces, which sounds awesome to me. That sounds like a cool field. All right, though. So hopefully you signed up if you want to sign up right now and follow along. If not, you can just see kind of how I'm going to tackle these problems and then hopefully apply it to your use case. So you won't have these projects. It'll just be blank, I think, when you first sign up. So you want to hit new data set. This is creating a new project, a new data set that we can work with. So first, I'm going to do one on object detection and instance segmentation together because they're very similar. So I'm just going to combine all these into one project for us right now. So I'm just going to call this workshop object, I guess. But you'd want to give it a meaningful data set name. You know, if you're labeling a specific type of wildlife or for a construction use case, you probably want the construction site name if that's where you're collecting the data. You can always come back and rename it though too. So I'm going to hit save and continue to sources. I'm going to hit upload, or I'm going to hit add a source so you can combine different sources here. They have support for Amazon S3 as well as Google Cloud Storage and then local files. So for this one, I'm just going to upload some local files here. And I'm going to take a step back and I have this instance segmentation folder. So if you did go to that Google Drive link, they'll be separated like this as well. There's 3 folders. So the first example I'm going to do is the segmentation and object detection. So I'm just going to select all these photos to upload, and we'll use them as examples. Some of them might take a minute just because they are some of them are very large, I think. I did not optimize them, so. And it looks like we're done here. So then I'm going to scroll up once you've uploaded the images that you want to label. Then we're going to go to label definitions. And this is where you create what's called your label schema. So at this point, you probably kind of want to know what you want to do with your data. You know, is it labeling for object detection, instance segmentation, feature points? And if so, what are you going to label? So I'm going to make a few examples just to show off here. You know, these you might not want to actually combine this many different things together in your data set. It just depends on how you want to organize it. So, but I'm going to make one called Goose, and I'm going to leave it as a rectangle. So I'm going to show labeling for object detection with rectangles. I'm going to hit save here, and you'll see this auto label. I'm going to come back to this, but this is a really cool feature where you can select classes, like common classes, to automatically label. There's another area where we can put classes in here. So I'm going to pass over this just for right now, and then we're going to use it very soon when we get back to the labeling tool, but you can set that up here. So I'm going to hit save for the goose, and then I'm going to make another goose. I'm going to call it Goose Polygon. So I'm just going to show the same example, but using polygons. And then I'm going to make one for car. That is going to also be a polygon. I tend to work a lot with polygons because you can also do object detection with them. It depends on what model you're training and how you're reading your data set. But a lot of times too, it just seems like you can get a little bit more accuracy out of a instance segmentation model versus just a object detection model. But it does totally depend on your use case. And then I'm going to make one for a cup. You'll see why when we label. That's going to be a polygon as well. And then I'll make a PCB, just kind of showing an example of labeling a damage on a PCB, which is a printed circuit board. And then I'll just call it damage, but this is going to be labeling for the damage on a PCB. So I will hit save here. And I think that's all the ones I need for this demo. So if we did ever want to come back and add more to this, we can. We can go back to our label definitions. If we scroll down, there's this section. It's optional. We're not going to fill it with anything right here, but it is really a cool feature if you're working with a team. Typically, you want to write pretty specific instructions of how to label your images. And you can also provide like embed images in here. So often you have kind of a domain expert, like a doctor or something, telling you how to label a specific tumor or whatever it is that you're labeling. And it's good to provide like good examples and bad examples. So especially if it's really complex and kind of hard to tell the difference, you say, this is what we're actually trying to do and not this, and have that embedded as instructions into your project. So I'm going to hit save and start labeling. And there we go. So now we have our goose image. And if I was going to label this for object detection, I will select my goose rectangle object or label. And then I just want to label with a square around it. And you typically want to be as close to the actual object as possible. So this, when we pass this into our deep learning model, it's going to, bring this data in and then look specifically in the square and try to understand, what it is that we're looking for. So it'll kind of learn how to pick up a goose in this case. Real quick, so if you want to adjust it, you can. If you want to delete any labels, you can just hit backspace or the delete key when it's selected like this. But I'm going to show a polygon label. So if you've never labeled polygons before, like I mentioned, it's kind of tracing around the object, kind of like drawing. So you would start, and then I'm going to do this very poorly here. Because I'm just going to go kind of fast, because you can see like labeling polygons and doing it accurately can actually take a little bit of time. And so this is actually one big reason why some people don't do them, is because it takes a lot of time. So if you're doing a kind of a project by yourself and you don't have a whole labeling team or anything like that, you might be like, I want to do object detection, even though I want polygons, just because this takes a long time to label. Right, that was way longer than doing a rectangle around a goose. And I'm not even doing the best of job here. So one cool feature in this tool is called Smart Poly, and that stands for Smart Polygon Selection. And so now if we click, you activate it by clicking this button here, Smart Poly. Now if we select our label, we just draw a box around our goose like we were labeling for object detection with just the rectangle like that. But instead, it will draw the polygon around it. So did I not click? Oh, there we go. So you can see instead of me drawing around and taking, I didn't time it, but it feels like a long time, especially on a complex data set, kind of like a goose. It takes a long time. It does depend on like, if you're doing a square, it's much easier to use polygon versus, like a goose or something like that. So let's try it again. Here I am labeling again this goose, and you'll see it actually did pretty good, but it messed up a little bit here. And that's because like even my eye, when zooming in like this, it's a little bit hard to tell, where the goose ends and where the sidewalk begins in this case. This model is just made to kind of generalize on abstracting objects. So if it does mess up like this, the cool thing is you just go in. You don't even have to really zoom in that far. You just go in and you can adjust these polygons. So if it made a misprediction, you can go and fix it. And if it gets you like 80 or 90% of the way there, then it's still way faster. If you want to delete actual nodes that it put in there, you can also select the individual node, hit the delete or back button, and also delete them too. So it's actually pretty easy to come in here and kind of adjust this how you need. I think it also messed up a little bit up here, again, because it's, even if you zoom in, it's kind of hard to tell that this is the goose head versus the sidewalk. And that's Smart Poly. So super cool. saves a ton of time labeling polygons. I didn't like doing big projects with polygons if I had to label them myself because it is very time consuming. But now with a tool like Smart Poly, it makes it way faster. So let's look at a couple other ways to speed up our labeling, and we'll get into these other images here in a second. So if I was actually labeling this, and let's go back for the object detection example, but I don't actually want to draw every single label because that is also time consuming just in general. So we can use this auto label feature. I'm going to go to this arrow here. We have copy forward, track forward, and auto label. I'll talk about the other ones in a minute. I'm going to select auto label. And this is where those pre-trained classes come in. So I mentioned there's a whole bunch in here. I think there's 81. Now, there isn't specifically one for a goose. So it gets a little tricky, except for there is one for a bird. So I'm going to type in bird, and I'll select it. I'm going to hit OK. And then, boom, it automatically drew boxes around where all the geese are. And I'll go ahead and hit submit. It's going to go to the next frame. And now you can see it automatically applied labels to the next frame. It found all the birds. In this case, there's all the geese, and automatically applied labels to them. So that saves a ton of time. It's really cool using this on a data set that there's the pre-trained classes for, because it saves a massive amount of time. So you'll see in a second, we're going to do it again with polygons on a different data set type. Any questions on that so far? I'm going to go ahead and move on, but let me know in the chat if you have any questions. So here, I'm going to go ahead and do auto label again. I'm going to just go ahead and do it right off the bat. We're going to label all the cars in these frames. So like taken from a video, then you upload those frames or video to this platform. I'm going to turn on auto label. I'm going to select car. And I know there's trucks in here. And we don't have any that come up in here, but I'm also going to select motorcycles. So this would be like if I wanted to label kind of all the vehicles that are in this video. And hopefully it'll do it all automatically. So I'm going to hit OK. It's going to find this car. It automatically drew a polygon around it. So I'm just going to hit submit. So really what we're doing at this point, the ideal use for this, if it works on your data set all the time, is that you can turn on these smart features and stuff, and then you want to just kind of QA to make sure that it's doing a good job labeling. And then if it's not, you got to go apply a label or adjust it. But essentially, how can we eliminate as much time as possible from someone manually labeling data? So we're going to hit again and go another frame. And you can see it's doing a good job of automatically labeling the cars. Here you can see that it messed up and it missed this one for some reason. If there was a perfect model just out there that could label everything, there wouldn't be a need for the data annotation tools. And so that's, again, why it's like we can remove as much friction as possible, but you still want to QA it to make sure that it is labeling correctly. So I'm going to turn on Smart Poly, and just use it to label this car that it missed. Boom, and then just hit submit. And then now it is getting in the next frame, which is pretty cool. And boom, that's how we labeled all of the cars, almost all of them with the auto label in that case. We had to only label one, I think, that it missed. And so one feature that's coming really soon that isn't in here yet is that you'll be able to label stuff in here and then directly train a model kind of in this interface, and then use that model to automatically label your data set. So right now you're kind of restricted to those 81 classes, and depending on kind of the angles and like what those classes look like in your use case, like if your birds look way different than what the model was trained on, maybe it won't work well for them. But we're having it so you could label. So let's say you could label like 100 images, maybe you would need more. It just totally depends on your data type. Then you could train a model and then start using that model to do the things like auto label, which will be really, really cool, because that's just one thing that you can't get around if you have a really complex type of data. And you almost always manually need to label it in some way. But if you can then train a model on it, that'll kind of remove that need, or at least speed it up with something like auto label, which will be really cool. So I'm going to do this cup example. I'm going to go ahead and turn on Smart Poly again, because again, why would I draw a polygon when I can have this tool do it for me? And then I'm going to turn on something called track forward. What this does, it actually does object tracking. So you'll see in a second, it's not auto label where it's going to automatically find something in a frame and label it. It's actually going to look at what we labeled from previous frames. So in this case, we're going to label these cups. And it got the shadow a little bit there. I might have been a little off on the label. I'll go fix that. Again, you want to be as tight as possible to the object. So I think with the shadow one, I was off a little bit. So it did a really good job there. If I want to come in and fix this, again, I just highlight. I can delete these and or just move them around. So I'm going to delete some here and then just tighten that up a little bit. Oh, and I don't think I mentioned these little grayed out ones. If you click on them, that creates a new node. So you can really, add and remove as much as you want from the predicted polygons, which is super helpful. So there we go. And we have track forward enabled. So this is really good if it's a sequential frame from a video. So like in this case, it's a video of looking at these cups at different angles. So it's going to take our labels and then automatically find where those objects moved in the next frame and apply the labels. So I'll hit submit. And so it's, again, it's only a slightly different angle because it's like a sequential video. Do it again. You'll see that we're moving angles on these cups, moving away from them, and it's still applying the correct labels to them, which is awesome. So again, it's like I only had to label them on the first frame, and I was able to use Smart Polygon in this case. So that only took a couple seconds. And then I'm really just hitting submit and QAing everything here. So super cool. I'll turn that off because the next frame is going to be the PCB example. And then here, I'm going to label the PCB. So let's say I was doing this for manufacturing, which is actually how I got into computer vision, was a manufacturing QA use case. So in this case, I might have been able to use Smart Poly or something, but it's pretty easy to draw a rectangle or a square for the polygons. And then for the damage in this case is, kind of these scratches on the PCB. We want to train a model to look for a PCB and then find this kind of like scratches or some sort of damage on it. This I would probably just label manually around because I don't think auto or Smart Poly would pick up on this kind of finite scratches. So I would do something like that and then feed all these images into my model and kind of understand what to look for, in this case scratches. So I'm going to hit submit. And that was all for this example of like the actual labeling. I'll show how to export this data set in a second. And then we'll get into the feature points and classification example. So I am going to just show real quick. If you want to go back to the labeler tab here, you can go in. It says, no data, because by default it only shows pending data. Typically, you only want to see the images you haven't labeled yet, unless you're reviewing. So you go back here, you could look at all images, or you could look at just submitted ones. So you could have roles where someone does the labeling, but before you train a model, you want to make sure they labeled it correctly and approve each one. So in this case, like we see, this looks good. We would hit approve and just go through all those images. I won't actually do that here, but that's how you would go through and approve images. And that's important because in this review tab, when we hit export here, you'll see that if you scroll down, by default, it's only going to export the approved images. That's because by default, this is what most people want kind of in the enterprise setting, because they usually do have something like a team of labelers or someone labels all the data, and then someone review it to make sure it's correct before training a model. So in this case, we have this just selected by default. But if you're working on like your own project and you just trust the labels are correct, you can select this box, which is submitted data annotations. So every time we labeled, we hit submit, that just goes in the submitted bucket. And so in this case, if I labeled everything and I want to train a model, I'll just hit, I want all of the images labeled. And then here you have options for train test split. So if you've done anything with deep learning before, or most machine learning, you have to have a training data set. You have a validation data set, which is what you look at while your model's training usually, and kind of you can adjust hyperparameters from looking at the output from that. And then you have a holdout test data set that you usually wait to use at the end. You have some other options here, but I'm going to go ahead and hit export. So here's all the export options too. So by default, we have this JSON object. So this is good for pretty much just everyone and every type of data labeling in here. Otherwise, if you're using something like Detectron2 or TensorFlow and they have a pre-built function for reading something in like a COCO data set or Pascal VLC, you can select these as well. And then also Apple's create.ml format. So COCO is actually what I use a lot of outside of our platform here. So I'm going to select that and I'll just hit export now. And once it's exported, you get this little export complete and it will send you an email with a download link. And then also you get a notification here. So this just turned red 4 seconds ago, my export's available. Then I will hit download and you'll get a zip file. Open this up. In this case, again, this is the COCO format, so some of them might look a little bit different, but I have a train, a test, and a validation JSON file in the COCO format, and then I have a IMG folder for images, and this is where all of our images live. And then these, I'll open this up, it won't be pretty, but this is where all of our actual labels live, and then they kind of associate back to those images in the folder. So you can see this is just a giant JSON folder. It's in the COCO format, so all of these things are coordinates of where those labels are. And then there's URLs back to the images. So this is how our model understands what to look for. Well, any questions from anybody? Everyone, the chat's super quiet today. But just checking before we move on, we'll do the feature points next. Do anyone think the smart features are cool, or the kind of the AI powered features? Like Smart Poly is awesome. I use it all the time, and it's like at this point I can't even really like think of labeling polygons without it in most cases now. And then I'm really excited for the auto label feature where I can just start labeling in here, train a model on that data, tie it back to my labeler, and then have it label, pretty much any data for me. It's gonna be so cool. Any other questions about labeling in general? Not even related to the tool or anything. There's a dashboard section in here as well, so you can kind of get some insights like what type of activity or a recent activity, like this would be a bar graph over time, how much is like approved, submitted, kind of the distribution of each class. This is actually really cool to look at because you can kind of see maybe how balanced your data set is. If you have a whole bunch of different labels, like in this case, we have way more cars than, geese. Cool, if there's not any questions yet, again, I'll be hanging out afterwards, but I'll just go ahead and do the feature points. So I'm gonna hit new data set, and I have some hand images. So this would be an example of kind of measuring feature points of like where fingers are in relation to each other. So I'm gonna hit add source, just like before. We're gonna select local files, and I'll go back one folder. I'll select these hand images and hit open. There's just 3 of them. They should upload very quickly. I'll go back to label definitions, and I would just say hands, or whatever you want to have this label as, hand, feature points, fingers. And then I'm gonna hit this drop down. I'm gonna hit feature points. So this is where you select all the different label types. I forget if I kind of talked about all the other ones. You probably saw me select things like polygon from in here. But in this case, we want feature points. You get this option of like these gradient colors, or 2 colors, which create a gradient as you label. I like having them very different. So I'll do something like, I'm going to start at blue. You'll see what I mean. And then it's going to change to red as we label over time. In this case, we're going to do 2 feature points just as an example for each finger. So this would be like from finger to palm, from thumb to palm. So we want 10. So you can type in or use this to kind of get the number you want. Again, you can put instructions if you want. I'm gonna hit save for this label. I'll hit save and start labeling. And now we have our feature points. I'm gonna select that. We have our hand image. So in this case, I would wanna do something like the tip of the thumb to kind of the the bottom of the thumb to the palm. And then same with like the finger to the palm for each one of these. And you can see that the color is kind of fading, so, or changing, I shouldn't say fading. And so we can see when like we started here where it's most blue, and then it kind of started changing to red. So you can kind of see where they tie to each other. And so it's important to know too, before you get to this point of labeling, how, like where those feature points align. So you can't just start labeling randomly in here. You actually need to know, like, you know, feature point 1 is going to be the tip of the thumb, and then 2 is going to be the base of the thumb. That needs to be defined before, and you need to do it the same, at least in any feature point case I've worked in, the same for each data set. So you can't just go, you know, start from the other side in the next image. So I'll hit submit on this one. And again, you want to, again, remember, so like if one was thumb top, you'd always want to do that. You can't just start randomly doing these ones. So you need to keep the same schema for each one. And then that needs to be defined kind of when you train your model. And then if you need to edit, also, you could, like if you need to see which number is what, you know, if you hover over it, it'll say like this one was 1. If you need to edit, you can double click in these. Should be double clicking. Maybe I need to pull this up. Isn't it doing it? You should be able to double click in here and then kind of just move these nodes. I'm not sure why it's not happening right this second. So if I wanted to move that in slightly, there we go. Something happened there. I might have done it too much and it lags. We'll try it in the next one. But you double click a node and then you would shift it in slightly. Let me come back to that. Let's try it on the new image. So again, and it can be kind of hard sometimes to keep track. You know, if you're labeling something like 64 different points, which is not like super uncommon to have a lot on complex face applications, because there might be like a whole bunch around the eye, a whole bunch around the mouth and stuff like that. Oh, so I just need to click once. Maybe the problem is I was double clicking, and then you can shift the node around. I think I messed that up for some reason previously. So it hit submit. And again, if you want to come back to everything, you just go back here. We can look at submitted. We can go look back at all of our labels, make adjustments if we wanted to, and then hit approve. Again, I would just go to review, export data set. 3 is definitely not enough for most models. This is just an example here. And then so you'd want to do whatever supports this type of data. So we'll use Cocoa again. We'll just hit export just as an example. We won't look at it again. But then you'll get this, the red notification. By the way, too, so you get the email. So the email should always go out as soon as you do that. If for whatever reason this ends up taking longer than normal to show up here, just refresh the whole page. Usually it shows up right away, just like you saw. But just occasionally, if for whatever reason, like notifications get hung up on your end, if you refresh, they should always show up, and then you can hit download, export, just like we did before. And then we can do the classification example real quick. New data set. Call it class. Save and continue. Again, just going to add a local source here. And I'll go back one folder. I have some classification examples. I have a bunny, a cat, and a dog. So we want to all assign a different label to these. And then I'll just go up, go label definitions. Again, we select from here. So we could do multi-classification, and that would give us, like, we could say animal and cat and dog. But in this case, so multi-classification is assigning multiple classes to each image, where we would say, like, it's an animal, but it's also cat, and like that. Whereas just the classification one here, it's just going to be one class that you can assign to an image. So in this case, it would be like cat, dog, or bunny, and those are the only options you can select for each image. So I will call this animal type, I guess. And then here we're going to type in cat. and then you just hit enter. Dog, hit enter, and that creates the class. And bunny, enter. And then you can also have a default option. So this is nice, especially if you know that like most of your images or something are going to be dogs. You could have this as the default option. It just makes it a little bit faster to label. So I'll hit save. Hit save and start labeling. And the image will load here. Here is a really cute little baby bunny. So I'm just going to hit this little drop down for animal type. And the default was dog. I want to change this kind of radio button over to bunny. And then just hit submit. And that's all it is for labeling to classification. You don't need to draw around where it is, because otherwise that would be something like the instance segmentation or object detection labeling. And here we're just kind of telling it this whole image, we're going to be looking for a cat. This is a picture of my sister's cat, and I was training it how to code. You can see it's doing a really great job there. Hit submit. And dog, by default, it's on dog. But if I wanted to double check, I would just hit the drop down and then hit submit. And then again, export data set. Let's say this time we were going to do the create ML classifier one. And I want to hit the submitted annotations. Just get all of them. If I didn't want to go through approve them. Hit export, and then we're done. That's all the kind of the common examples that a lot of people kind of need to start working with. It's not every type of computer vision labeling, but it is kind of, I think, most of the common ones. Definitely most of the common ones that I get asked about, how do I label these different types of things? And I hope that's enough start for you to get started labeling. Feature points can be complicated. You'll need to learn about how you want to structure your data. So in the case of hands, it's pretty simple, but if you're doing something much more complex like a face, you might need way more feature points, and you need to figure out which ones are going to go where, which ones are on the eyes and eyebrows and everything like that. But I think you're at a good point now, if you kind of started from beginning to end here, of seeing how to do all the different types that will hopefully come up in your career or whatever problems you're trying to solve right now with computer vision. So I'm going to stop the recording, but I will be hanging out if anyone has any other questions.